When people talk about anxiety, they often focus on thoughts, racing worries, worst case scenarios, spirals of what ifs. But what's actually driving those thoughts isn't the mind alone. It's the body. During anxious states, the body is not reacting to thoughts. It's generating the conditions that shape those thoughts, the physiological state you're in. Your heart rate, breathing pattern, posture, muscle tension, all of that comes first, and it sets the tone for how your brain perceives the world. The nervous system has two main branches, the sympathetic, which is responsible for fight or flight, and the parasympathetic, which governs rest and calm. When anxiety hits, it's the sympathetic system taking over. This isn't a conscious choice. It's automatic. Heart rate increases, your pupils dilate, your breathing becomes short and shallow, and blood flow redirects away from your gut and toward your limbs to prepare you to run or fight. That physiological shift happens in milliseconds. And here's what's critical. It sends signals up to the brain that say, we're in danger. This feedback from the body to the brain changes the way your brain interprets information. Suddenly, neutral events feel threatening. Small problems feel like crises. You don't think your way into anxiety. You feel your way into it. The brain is responding to the body's signals, not leading them. This is why trying to just think positive or calm down rarely works in moments of high anxiety. The body is in the driver's seat. So if you want to change your anxious thoughts, you need to start by changing your body's state. That's the leverage point. Techniques like the physiological sigh, 2 inhales followed by a long exhale, immediately lower carbon dioxide levels and slow the heart rate. When that happens, signals travel from the body back to the brain saying, we're okay now. The result? Thought patterns begin to shift. The spiral starts to flatten out. You can see this in brain imaging. When people regulate their breathing or shift their visual focus, the activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, starts to decrease. Simultaneously, activity increases in the prefrontal cortex, which governs rational thinking and decision making. The body changes first, then the brain follows. Even posture matters. If your shoulders are slumped and your gaze is low, your nervous system interprets that as submission or defeat. But if you stand tall, eyes forward, jaw relaxed, that subtle shift in posture feeds upward into your brain and starts to recalibrate your internal state. This is not philosophy, it's biology. In anxious states, the mind is downstream of the body. That's the key insight. So the fastest, most reliable way to control anxiety isn't by wrestling with your thoughts. It's by interrupting the body's alarm signals: breath, posture, focus, grounding. Change those inputs, and the brain will change its output. You take control not by thinking better, but by feeling safer physiologically. That's how you reclaim control, from the bottom up. One of the fastest, most reliable ways to calm the nervous system, especially during a spike in anxiety, is something called a physiological sigh. It's incredibly simple. Take 2 quick inhales through the nose, then follow with 1 long exhale through the mouth. It looks like this. Inhale, inhale again, exhale. What's important is the second inhale comes before the first exhale, and the exhale is long and complete. This isn't a relaxation trick. It's hardwired into your biology. In fact, the physiological sigh is something your body does naturally, especially during sleep or after a cry. It's built into your system as a tool for recalibration. When you're anxious, your breathing becomes irregular, short, shallow, and fast. That kind of breathing reduces carbon dioxide too quickly, which creates a sense of suffocation or panic even when you're not in physical danger. Your brain then reads that disrupted breathing pattern as a sign that something is wrong, and it amplifies the anxiety response. Here's where the physiological sigh comes in. The first inhale expands the lungs. The second, smaller inhale expands the alveoli, the tiny sacs in the lungs where gas exchange happens and helps release trapped carbon dioxide. The long exhale then flushes that CO2 out of your system. This single cycle restores proper gas balance in the blood, which reduces the drive to breathe rapidly. That's the physiology. But what happens next is just as important. The heart rate begins to slow, and the vagus nerve, which is part of your parasympathetic nervous system, starts to engage. That's the rest and calm signal your brain needs to interrupt the anxious loop. If you do 2 or 3 rounds of physiological sighs, the shift can happen within 60 seconds. Your shoulders drop, your jaw relaxes, your visual field stabilizes. But the real power lies in what happens upstream in your brain. The amygdala, which is scanning for threat, gets less input, saying panic. And the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logical thought and control, gets more room to operate. That's the key to changing your state. You're not telling yourself to relax. You're giving your nervous system the conditions it needs to do it automatically. You can think of this as the nervous system's emergency brake. When anxiety ramps up and your system is out of control, the double inhale and long exhale create an instant shift. No equipment, no environment change, just breath, done with intention and timing. You're interrupting the signal cascade that keeps you locked in fight or flight. What makes this tool so powerful is its speed. Most techniques for managing anxiety take time, journaling, meditation, or talking it through. But this is different. It works at the speed of your biology. 2 inhales, 1 long exhale. That's it. You're not escaping anxiety. You're turning the dial down, right at the source. When anxiety hits, most people focus on their thoughts or their breath, but there's another lever that's just as powerful: vision. Your eyes are not just passive cameras capturing the world. They're extensions of your brain, directly connected to your internal state. And how you use your vision has a direct impact on your level of alertness or calm. In anxious states, your visual system shifts automatically into what's called panoramic vision. Your eyes scan wide. You take in more of the environment. Your awareness spreads out to detect possible threats. This is an evolutionary adaptation. If you were being hunted, you wouldn't focus on one blade of grass. You'd scan the entire field. Your pupils dilate, your peripheral vision becomes dominant, and your brain enters a hypervigilant state. That wide-angle view is essentially your body preparing for survival. But here's the critical point. This system isn't one way. Just as anxiety can drive wide vision, you can reverse the process. You can change your visual behavior in a way that sends the opposite message to your brain. I'm safe. That's what happens when you intentionally narrow your visual field.
To do this, pick a single object in your environment, anything that's still and neutral. Could be a cup, a book, a spot on the wall. Focus your gaze there. Hold your attention steady. You don't need to stare aggressively, but concentrate on that one point. Let the rest of the environment blur out. This is known as focal vision, and it's tightly linked to a calm, centered, autonomic state. Why does this work? Because narrow vision tells the brain there's no threat nearby. If you're able to focus on one specific thing, that means you're not under immediate danger. You wouldn't be able to do that if you were being chased or attacked. This visual behavior feeds information directly into the brainstem, the part of the brain that governs core survival reflexes. And it begins to dial down the sympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate lowers, breathing becomes more regular, you re-enter a state of control. Focal vision also helps suppress the activity of the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and increases activity in the prefrontal cortex. the part of your brain involved in decision making and emotional regulation. So not only are you calming your body, you're sharpening your cognitive function. You can use this tool anytime anxiety spikes, even in a public setting, even during a conversation. Just shift your focus, even briefly, to a single object. It doesn't require closing your eyes or changing your environment. It just takes awareness and intent. The body responds almost immediately because the visual system is a powerful signal pathway to the brain. In short, your vision isn't just a way to see the world, it's a lever to control how safe or threatened your brain thinks you are. Narrowing the visual field is a silent, invisible, dynamic signal that tells the nervous system to stand down, and in doing so, you create the internal conditions for calm. One of the most overlooked tools for managing anxiety is also one of the simplest: naming what you feel. It may seem counterintuitive. When you're in a high stress state, the last thing you might think to do is speak or label the emotion. But this is a neurologically powerful move. Why? Because it shifts your brain activity away from the fear centers and toward the circuits responsible for control and logic. Here's what happens during anxiety. The amygdala, a deep brain structure responsible for threat detection, becomes highly active. It sounds the alarm and your body responds. Your heart rate spikes, your breath shortens, your muscles tighten. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain that handles reasoning, planning, and conscious control, goes offline or at least becomes less dominant. That's why it feels like anxiety hijacks your thinking. You don't feel in control because biologically you're not. The brain is in reactive mode. But there's a fast way to shift that balance. It's called affect labeling. Simply put, it means identifying and saying, either out loud or silently, what you're experiencing. I'm feeling anxious. This is stress. I'm overwhelmed. That act alone begins to engage the prefrontal cortex and reduce the intensity of activity in the amygdala. You're bridging the emotional brain and the rational brain through language. This has been shown in functional MRI studies. When people look at emotionally charged images and are asked to label the emotion they feel, sadness, anger, fear, their amygdala activity decreases significantly and their prefrontal cortex lights up. It's not about denying the emotion, it's not positive thinking. Um, it's naming reality, and that changes how the brain processes it. The reason this works is because language is processed in the cortical areas of the brain. So when you name an emotion, you're literally moving the experience up into a higher order system. You're no longer just reacting, you're observing. That shift from reaction to observation is where control begins. What's crucial is that you don't have to solve the emotion or explain it. You're not diving into a narrative or trying to figure out the root cause. You're just identifying it, like saying, there's a fire. You don't have to know what started it to begin responding intelligently. This technique can be especially effective when paired with breathwork or visual control. For example, after a physiological sigh or narrowing your visual focus, simply say to yourself, "This is anxiety," or "My nervous system is activated." That brief label helps lock in the shift from survival mode to presence. It gives your prefrontal cortex a foothold to start climbing back into control. And if you can go one step further, you can reframe the experience. This is a stress response. My body is trying to protect me. Now you're not just labeling the emotion, you're beginning to lead it. But it all starts with the name. Recognition precedes regulation. You can't change what you haven't identified. In a moment of anxiety, naming the emotion may seem too small to matter. But neurologically, it's one of the fastest ways to disrupt the fear loop and re-engage the thinking brain. When anxiety takes over, your internal systems fall out of sync. The brain races, the heart pounds, the breath shortens, and none of it feels coordinated. That dissonance between your brain, heart, and body creates a feedback loop that amplifies stress. But there's one way to reestablish coherence across all systems quickly and reliably: controlled breathwork. This isn't just about calming down, it's about realigning the systems that govern your state. Your heart, lungs, and brain are connected by both electrical and chemical signals. They communicate constantly. When you're in a stressed or anxious state, that communication becomes chaotic. Heart rate increases irregularly, breathing becomes erratic, and your brain receives those signals as danger, reinforcing the anxiety. Controlled breathwork is a way to send a different message through that same network. When you intentionally slow your breathing and follow a structured rhythm, such as inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 2, exhale for 6, you begin to restore synchrony between these systems. This is sometimes referred to as physiological coherence. It's not just a calm feeling, it's a measurable biological state where the nervous system is balanced, the heart rate becomes more stable, and the brain begins to function with more clarity. Here's what's happening under the surface. Every time you inhale, your heart rate speeds up slightly. Every time you exhale, it slows down. This is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia, and it's a natural part of how the heart and lungs stay in conversation. When you extend the exhale, you activate the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, the rest and digest circuit. That longer exhale sends a signal through the vagus nerve to the brainstem, telling it that it's safe to calm down. And when the brain receives that signal, it reduces activity in the threat detection centers, like the amygdala, and allows the prefrontal cortex to regain control. Controlled breath also affects heart rate variability, or HRV. A higher HRV is associated with resilience, calm, and adaptability. When you breathe in a controlled rhythm, HRV increases, which improves not only your mental state, but your physical readiness. You're training your system to respond to stress without being overtaken by it. Even the act of focusing on the breath brings your attention into the present moment. You're no longer lost in abstract worry. You're grounded in a physical rhythm. That alone interrupts the spiral of anxious thought and redirects cognitive resources toward regulation and clarity. It's important to note that this isn't something you have to do for 20 minutes. Even 90 seconds of controlled breathing can create a measurable shift in your internal state. The key is to follow a pattern that emphasizes slower, longer exhales. That's the switch that rebalances your nervous system. So when anxiety spikes, use the breath as your anchor. You're not just calming down, you're synchronizing. You're aligning the brain, heart, and body into a rhythm that supports clarity, presence, and control. That internal harmony is the foundation for emotional regulation. Anxiety often feels like a storm inside the mind, a relentless internal narrative replaying fears, worries, and what if scenarios. This constant mental chatter keeps your nervous system locked in a state of hyper arousal. One of the most effective ways to disrupt this storm is by anchoring your attention externally. This means deliberately shifting your focus away from the swirling thoughts inside your head and toward a concrete, external sensory input. When you're caught in anxiety, your brain is stuck in a feedback loop. Your thoughts trigger physical symptoms, and those symptoms feed back into your thoughts, escalating the cycle. This loop is self-reinforcing and difficult to break because your attention is trapped internally, ruminating on danger signals that may or may not be real. By moving your attention outward, you interrupt that loop. Instead of being pulled deeper into your mind's narrative, you engage different neural circuits, those involved in processing sensory information from the outside world. This shift has a calming effect on the nervous system. It sends a clear message to your brain. There is something concrete here, right now, that demands my focus. I am safe enough to observe. This process leverages the brain's attentional networks, especially the frontoparietal cortex, which governs where and how attention is deployed. When you deliberately anchor your focus to an external stimulus, like the hum of an air conditioner, or the ticking of a clock, or the feel of your feet on the ground, you engage these networks and reduce activity in the default mode network. The default mode network is the part of the brain most active during self-referential thinking and internal dialogue, which fuels anxiety. Practically, this means that when anxiety spikes, instead of trying to push the thoughts away, which often backfires, you redirect your attention to something sensory and external. This redirection doesn't just distract you, it changes the brain's functional state. Sensory processing pathways take precedence, and the limbic system, the brain's emotional center, receives fewer anxiety-provoking signals. Over time, this external anchoring strengthens your ability to regulate attention consciously. It's a skill that trains your nervous system to become less reactive and more present. Even brief moments of external focus can produce a rapid decrease in physiological markers of stress, such as heart rate and skin conductance. One of the easiest ways to practice this is to pick a single sound in your environment and track it for 30 seconds. Notice its pitch, rhythm, and how it changes over time. Or feel the texture of a chair beneath you or the pressure of your feet on the floor. This sensory detail becomes an anchor, grounding you in the present and breaking the runaway narrative of anxious thoughts. In essence, anchoring attention externally acts like a circuit breaker for your anxiety loop. It pulls your brain out of reactive mode and invites it into a state of observation and calm. This shift is not about ignoring anxiety, it's about interrupting the internal process that keeps anxiety alive. When practiced regularly, this simple tool empowers you to reclaim your mental space and steer your nervous system towards safety and control. When anxiety takes hold, it often feels like your mind is trapped in a loop of panic, catastrophic thoughts, racing predictions, and a sense of helplessness. What most people don't realize is that your perception of anxiety itself can either amplify the distress or help dissolve it. This is where a cognitive reframe comes into play, a deliberate shift in how you interpret what you're experiencing. It's not about pretending everything is fine. It's about changing the narrative your brain is running to one that fosters presence and control instead of panic and helplessness. Anxiety is fundamentally a biological alarm system gone into overdrive. Your body is reacting to signals that something might be dangerous even when it isn't. The sensations of increased heart rate, shortness of breath, and muscle tension are all parts of this survival response. If you interpret those sensations as threatening or catastrophic, I'm losing control, this will never end, or I'm going to fail, you fuel the nervous system's alarm state. Your brain hears those thoughts as confirmation that the threat is real and urgent, and it ramps up the anxiety even more. A cognitive reframe interrupts this cycle by changing the meaning of those sensations and thoughts. For example, instead of thinking, my heart is racing because I'm panicking, you might say to yourself, my heart is racing because my body is preparing me to face a challenge. This subtle but powerful shift moves your brain's interpretation from danger to readiness. It tells your nervous system, this is normal, this is useful, and I can manage it. Neuroscience shows that meaning shapes neural circuits. The brain is a prediction machine. It constantly updates its understanding of the world based on incoming data and past experience. When you reframe your experience, you're sending a new prediction. Instead of threat, you're signaling opportunity or safety. This engages the prefrontal cortex, which can then modulate the amygdala and other limbic structures involved in fear. Reframing also activates what's called top-down control. This means your higher cognitive processes are exerting influence over more primitive emotional circuits. The more you practice this, the more your brain builds pathways that favor calm, rational responses over reactive panic. Importantly, cognitive reframing is not about denial or positive thinking in a superficial way. It's about accurate recognition and reinterpretation. For example, saying, "This is just anxiety, my body's way of preparing me, not a sign of danger," acknowledges the reality of the experience without feeding fear. In practical terms, you can pair this reframe with other physiological tools like breathwork or visual focus to create a full body shift from panic to presence. The breath calms the body, narrowing your visual field signals safety, and the cognitive reframe tells your brain what to expect next: control, not chaos. When anxiety arises, repeating a phrase such as, "This is my body getting ready, I am safe, I am in control," can be enough to start turning down the volume of panic. Over time, these repeated reframes reshape the brain's habitual responses, making you more resilient. Ultimately, cognitive reframing reasserts your role as the observer and director of your internal experience. It changes the narrative from "I am a victim of anxiety" to "I am an active participant in managing my state." That shift is essential for moving from panic to presence and regaining control over your nervous system. Bringing all these elements together, breath, vision, and mindset, you create a powerful toolkit that works directly with your biology to calm anxiety in minutes. Anxiety doesn't have to control you. By understanding how your body and brain communicate and by using these intentional strategies, you can interrupt the fear cycle at its source and reclaim a sense of presence and control. It's not about fighting anxiety with willpower alone. It's about working with the natural rhythms of your nervous system to bring yourself back to safety, clarity, and calmness, one breath and one focus at a time.